Hey guys, it's Kyla at the MJC, and today we're going to talk about the child support section of the modification motion. Before I get into that though, just a reminder, as always, that nothing in this video is intended to be legal advice. It is a video, so it means I can't analyze your situation to help you figure out if a modification is right for you, to help you figure out if a court is going to be able to order what you're asking for, to determine if what you're asking for is in your best interests, or anything else like that. So if you have those sorts of questions, you can get some legal advice. Here in Milwaukee County, you can get brief legal advice for free through the Marquette Volunteer Legal Clinics. If you aren't located in Milwaukee County, you can contact your clerk of court to find out what resources are available in your area. All right, so this is the child support section. If you're going to be filling out the child support section, you'll check the box next to C. If you don't want to talk about child support in this motion, you don't need to fill this section out, so you can just leave it unchecked and move on to the next section. But in our case, we're going to go through how to fill out the section, so we'll check C. So this first section, this number 1, is about what the child support currently is. And so it wants to know what is currently ordered. So you're going to put that number here, what is currently ordered in your case. For most people, you'll probably know what that is because it's what's being withheld from your check. But do be a little bit careful, because if you have an arrears repayment amount, the amount being withheld from your check might be slightly different than the actual order on child support. So if you're not sure about what the ordered child support amount is, you can check your court order. Again, you can get a copy of your court order from the Civil Records Division of your county's courthouse if you don't have a copy of that order. So you'll put the amount. In our sort of scenario we've been going through here with John Smith and Jane Doe, for those of you who have watched all of these videos, we know that John is paying $340 per month to Jane. And now make sure for this per, so you put the amount here and then per week, per month here, we again want that ideally to be how it is ordered. So most commonly for more recent orders that have been in the last 3 to 5 years, it's going to be ordered per week. So in this case, it would be whatever that would turn out to be weekly. In some older cases, it may be ordered per month. A lot of people will say, well, it comes out of my check bi-weekly. The child support agency has a calculation to tell them how to pull it out of your check weekly or bi-weekly or twice a month, sort of depending on how your check is distributed. But it should be ordered either weekly or monthly. And so we'll want to go with that ordered amount if possible. The next section here that it wants to talk about is a deviation. So deviation is just a fancy lawyer word for when the court does something different than what sort of the standard equation spits out. So if you've ever been in a hearing, they usually say, okay, the equation would be this number, and then they either go with that number, or in some cases they choose to do something different. So if they just took the standard calculation number, or you don't remember anyone saying anything about a deviation and your court order doesn't mention one, you can just go ahead and put A. And that will be true for a lot of people, but in some situations you may have a deviation. As you can tell here, the most common reason for it to deviate is for health insurance. So if I pay for my child's health insurance, I may end up getting a little bit of a discount on my child support. If the other parent, the parent that I pay support to, pays for the child's health insurance, then I may end up paying a little bit more than that state standard number in child support. So if that applies to you, if either your court order notes there's been a deviation, or if you believe there was one, you're going to check B, and then you'll indicate how much the deviation was. So it will usually say in your order, that they deviated by 50 or 100 or whatever. So here, for example, if John, let's say when they were in court, the court calculated that under the state standard number, John would pay $400 per month, but they said because he was paying for health insurance, he only had to pay $340. We would check here, we would say they deviated by $60 downward. So it was $60 less than the amount the court said. Similarly, if this were a situation where maybe Jane paid for the health insurance, and so they calculated that John's standard support number would be 280, but determined that there should be a $60 deviation upward, so going up from 280 to 340, you could have that as well. Most of the clients that we're helping at the Justice Center don't seem to have a deviation, so I don't think that's really common among most of the folks we're working with. But as ever, your situation may vary, so make sure you're checking those orders and getting the right boxes checked. But I'm going to go ahead and check A for our sample one here. Number 2 is now talking about what we want it to be. So in number 1, we said this is what it is. 2 is talking about what we want it to be going forward. The first line we have here, to a new amount beginning, on this line it wants to know a date. So typically we put the first of the next month. So right now it is February of 2022, and so what we would put is March 1st of 2022, so the first of the next month. Here in Milwaukee, at least, you won't get in by that date. Your court date would be further out, but we're essentially asking the court to backdate once you get in to the first of that next billing cycle. Courts do have discretion on that, so they don't have to backdate to that date, but they can, so that's what we ask for. If you have another specific date further ahead in mind, you can certainly do that. So you could say, let's say your child was turning 18 in May 25th. You could go ahead and say, I want it to take effect May 25th or May 26th there. So you could list that there. Broadly speaking, this date has to be now going forward. There are definitely restrictions on the ability of a court to change a number in the past. So backdating or like going back and revising an order, essentially changing it for the past, is something you'll want to get legal advice on. There are a whole bunch of rules related to it, and sometimes it can't be done. So if that's what you're wanting to do, worth checking in on. But from now going forward, again, we put the first of the next month. And then here you're going to indicate who the new amount is going to be paid by and who it's going to be paid to. You can either put the parent, so we could say it's going to be paid from father to mother, for example. So like the people's relationship to the child. You can also put a name. I know some folks, just the names are easier and it makes it clearer. You could do that as well. So if it's going to be paid by John Smith to Jane Doe. Some people will say, well, what if I'm wanting to set this to 0? Isn't it then paid by nobody to nobody? You'll still want to put the names. So whoever paid this, if we're wanting this amount to be set to 0, we'll still say who pays it because we're telling them whose amount we're setting to 0. So if you don't do that, if I left these 2 lines blank, they wouldn't know that I meant for this $340 that John pays to be set to 0. So then you have 3 choices for what the new amount will be. You can either indicate that you want it to be based on state child support standards. So basically you just want the court to recalculate. So if this works for situations where maybe your income has changed and you want them to recalculate based on your new income, or the other party's income has changed, you want them to recalculate based on the person who pays new income. It also might apply in situations where maybe one of the children has aged out. So if John and Jane had a third child, they had Sally Smith, Susie Smith, and Sam Smith, and Sam Smith is already 18, then John might want to recalculate so that it now just includes 2 children in that calculation. So that's A. A is just, I want you to recalculate what the state standard number would be based on my new circumstances. B is for situations where you want to set it to a new number. You want to propose a new number that is something other than 0. So for example, maybe John wants to propose a lower number. He wants to suggest it could be $200 per month. Or maybe it could be, if Jane were filling this out, or if John just wants to pay more for some reason, it might be a higher number. So maybe, Jane proposes that it would be higher. It'd be $500 per month, or maybe John, wants to propose something higher. Do keep in mind this is for numbers other than 0. I usually tell people if you're filling this section out, You can put whatever number you want. So I could put $1 million a month here, but unless my ex is a Packer or a Brewer, I'm probably not going to get that number. And honestly, I might not get it even if they're a Packer or a Brewer. So, the court doesn't have to go with this number. They can still check it for reasonableness, but you can definitely propose what you'd like to ask for. If you do have questions about what amount to suggest or which option to select, a great thing to get some legal advice on. The last one that you can choose is held open. So C, held open, that's fancy lawyer language for 0 for now. So held open means 0. That's why I said B is for numbers other than 0, because C is 0. So we'll say that because the children are now in his proposal going to be living with John, so again, if the court goes with what he suggested up here, where they live primarily with him, then we'll say that he wants his child support to be 0 then. Last but not least, there is this section here where it's I request this new amount. This section does apply to all 3 of these. So a lot of people think it only applies to C, but it actually applies to A, B, and C. And so this is going back to the deviation part that we talked about here. It's just asking, do you want this new amount to be slightly different than the state standard amount if someone pays for health insurance? And so typically, if you picked C, you're just going to pick 1, because if you said you want it to be 0, it's unusual that you say you want, yes, I want it to be 0, but I want it to deviate upward because of health insurance. And similarly, people who've done B have often already added that health insurance into the number they're proposing, so you might end up in 1. But if you've done A, or if for some reason you've done one of the other ones and you want to request a deviation, 1 is saying you want no deviation. 2, just like above, we indicate how much we want that deviation to be. So if it's saying, I want it to be $60 more as a contribution for health insurance, upward, or if it's saying, I want a $60 discount because of health insurance, downwards. But just to make this all make sense, I'll go ahead and say John doesn't want 1 since he's asking for it to be 0. All right, well, that is all for the child support section. Thanks for hanging on with me through this video. I know it was a little bit long, but next time we'll come back and we will talk about maintenance. Until then, thank you guys for watching, and I hope that you're able to go out and represent yourselves well.